The courtroom was supposed to be a place of justice, but for twin sisters Maya and Jasmine, it felt like a battlefield. As they stood before the judge, his words dripped with condescension, his smirk barely hidden as he ridiculed them in front of the entire courtroom. The whispers in the crowd only fueled his arrogance. To him, they were just two young black women, easy to mock, easy to dismiss. But what the judge didn't know was that Maya and Jasmine weren't just any sisters. They were U.S. Army trained specialists, skilled in ways no one in that courtroom could have imagined. As he laughed at their supposed weakness, the sisters exchanged a knowing glance. They had faced far worse than an old man with a robe and a gavel. And in a moment that left the courtroom speechless, they revealed something that would change everything. The judge leaned back in his chair, still amused, tapping his fingers against the desk. "And what exactly do you think you can teach me?" He sneered, his voice thick with arrogance. The courtroom watched in silence, waiting for the sister's response. Maya took a slow step forward, her eyes locked onto his. Jasmine remained still, her expression unreadable. "Respect," Maya said finally, her voice calm but firm. The judge scoffed, shaking his head, but before he could respond, Jasmine spoke up. "And discipline," she added, her tone sharper. Their words hung in the air, confusing those who had expected them to cower. Someone in the crowd whispered, "What do they mean?" Others leaned in, curiosity replacing doubt. The sisters glanced at each other again, their silent understanding clear. They had trained under some of the toughest conditions imaginable. But the judge had no idea what kind of strength he was up against. The judge's smirk faded just slightly, but he masked it with a chuckle. "Discipline," he repeated, shaking his head. "You two think you know something about that?" His tone was dripping with condescension, the same arrogance that had silenced so many before. But Maya and Jasmine had spent years training their minds just as much as their bodies. They weren't rattled. Jasmine's jaw tightened, but she remained composed. "Yes," she said simply. The weight in her voice made a few people in the courtroom sit up straighter. "We know what it's like to be underestimated, to be pushed past every limit, to have someone in power try to break you." The judge laughed again, but there was something forced about it this time. "You think I'm trying to break you?" he asked mockingly. Maya's eyes didn't leak his. "We've seen worse," she said, "much worse." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some people nodded, others looked confused. But one man, sitting near the back, suddenly looked nervous. His hands clenched into fists, his eyes darting toward the exit. The judge shifted in his seat, sensing the change in the room. "Enough of this nonsense," he snapped. "You two are here to answer for your actions, not give speeches." Jasmine tilted her head slightly. "And what exactly do you think our actions were?" she asked. The judge narrowed his eyes. "You know exactly what you did." His voice was colder now, as if he was trying to regain control. Maya took another step forward, her movements controlled, deliberate. "Do we?" she asked. "Or do you just need us to be guilty?" The tension in the room thickened. The sisters weren't just defending themselves, they were exposing something deeper. And from the way the judge gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white, it was clear that he knew it too. The judge's grip on his desk tightened. He was losing control, and he knew it. The power he had wielded so easily over others wasn't working on Maya and Jasmine. They weren't afraid. They weren't backing down. And worst of all, they knew something that made him uneasy. A rustle went through the courtroom as people sensed the shift. The man in the back, the one who had looked nervous before, was now glancing toward the door more frequently, his foot tapping anxiously. Jasmine caught it. She had been trained to notice details, to read people. And right now, everything about him screamed that he had something to hide. Maya turned back to the judge. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "We do know exactly what we did." She let the words hang, drawing the courtroom in, forcing everyone to listen. "And so do you." The judge's face darkened. "Watch yourself," he warned, his voice low. Jasmine took a step forward. "You want the truth, don't you?" she asked. "Or would you rather keep pretending?" The judge slammed his gavel down. "Enough." His voice boomed, but it didn't have the same weight as before. It wasn't authority. It was panic. That's when Maya turned to the crowd. "Why don't we ask him about his time in the military?" she said, her eyes still locked on the judge. A stunned silence fell over the room. The judge's mouth pressed into a thin line, his breathing heavy. But it was the man in the back, the one who had been shifting in his seat, who reacted the most. His face drained of color. Jasmine turned, her gaze landing on him. "You remember, don't you?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. The man shot up from his chair. The room tensed. The truth was closing in, and no one knew what was coming next. The man in the back stood frozen, his breath shallow, his eyes darting between the sisters and the judge. The room had gone completely silent, everyone waiting for what would happen next. Maya and Jasmine didn't move, didn't blink. They knew they had struck a nerve. Then, without warning, the man turned toward the door. His sudden movement sent a ripple of tension through the crowd. A guard by the exit shifted, ready to intervene if necessary. The judge, for the first time since the hearing began, looked genuinely uneasy. "You don't want to do that," Jasmine said calmly, her voice cutting through the thick air. "Running won't change what happened." The man hesitated, his hands shaking slightly. He wasn't just a random spectator. He was part of something bigger, something the sisters had been piecing together long before stepping into this courtroom. Maya turned back to the judge, her expression unreadable. "He remembers," she said. "And so do you." The judge opened his mouth, but no words came out. His jaw tightened, his fingers tapping anxiously against the desk. The authority he once commanded was slipping away, and he knew it. Jasmine took another step forward. "You thought this would be simple," she continued. "Just another case, another chance to humiliate someone who couldn't fight back. But you didn't expect us, did you?" The judge exhaled sharply, his frustration breaking through. "Enough of this," he snapped. "I won't have my courtroom turned into some kind of—" Maya cut him off. "Your courtroom?" she repeated, tilting her head. "Or your cover-up?" Gasps spread through the room. Even the stenographer hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The weight of the accusation had landed, and now everyone was watching to see what the judge would do next. The judge's face turned red, his lips pressing into a thin line. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the weight of— Then, just when it seemed like everything was finally out in the open, the doors burst open. A group of officials stormed in, their expressions unreadable. The judge stiffened. He knew what was coming. One of them stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Judge Lawson," he said, "we need to have a word with you." The judge's gavel slipped from his hand, clattering against the desk. He didn't even try to protest. Maya and Jasmine exchanged a look. Justice wasn't always immediate, but today, the truth had finally broken through. And that was just the beginning. The judge sat frozen as the officials closed in around him. His authority, his arrogance, everything he had built was crumbling in front of everyone. The courtroom remained silent, the weight of the moment sinking in. No one had expected this. No one had thought justice would come so swiftly. Maya and Jasmine stood tall, watching as the man who had ridiculed them was finally held accountable. They weren't just two sisters fighting against a corrupt system. They were proof that the truth couldn't stay buried forever. The man near the door let out a shaky breath, relief washing over his face. He had carried the weight of that secret for too long. As the judge was led away, Maya turned to her sister. "It's over," she said softly. Jasmine nodded. "For him, maybe. But for us, this is just the beginning." And with that, the sisters walked out, leaving the courtroom forever changed.